You're listening to Don't IEP Alone with special education advocate Lisa Lightner. For more information about Lisa, the IEP Toolkit, and more ways we can help you in your process, go to adayinourshoes.com. Now back to the show with your host, Lisa.
Hey, Lisa Lightner, special education advocate here, and I want to take a moment and talk about gotcha as an advocacy strategy. I alluded to it in a previous episode when I talked about the parent who wanted this report from the school, and she's going back and forth with this report that the school was supposed to give her and all that. This happens a lot with service logs. When parents don't, they see their child not making progress, they see their child still struggling. So one of the things that they ask for is a service log. And I think they're expecting it to be this gotcha, right? This like the school's going to hand over this blank report that clearly points out that your child's services have not been provided, and therefore it's your aha, see, my kid is not getting services, and that's why he or she is struggling, or that is why he or she is not making progress. And I have just found that gotcha is not, it's just not an effective advocacy strategy. Several years ago, I go to this place called the Book Barn. It's run by my local Lions Club, and they have used books. And they're all like $1.50 and 50 cents and all that, and that's where I get my books. So I saw one time this old copy of Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. And it was, 25 cents or whatever, and I was curious, so I picked it up. Took my son to a sports practice. It was a clinic, actually, so it was an all-afternoon thing. And basically read the entire book while he was at the sports clinic. It's an easy read, and I skimmed it. I didn't read deep in. And he goes into his habits of how to win friends and influence people. One tactic or one tip that he gives that sticks out to me to this day. And now, mind you, I think this book, the first publication of this book was 1937. So we're talking about a book that's almost 100 years old. But one of the first tips that he says is that people do not like to be told that they are wrong. And he gave many scenarios and studies and had lots of documentation of people who were presented with overwhelming evidence that they were wrong, and they still wouldn't admit that they were wrong. Yes, this can also be applied to current times. But people do not like to be told that they are wrong. So I have adopted that, and it doesn't mean that people aren't wrong, and it doesn't mean that we don't hold people accountable. But if you walk into an IEP meeting and your focus is on criticizing the IEP team and telling them that they're wrong, it's just not going to be a collaborative meeting. That's not, you have to keep it focused on the child. Not you are not doing your job. It's, hey, my child is not making progress. Let's dig in and see what all the data says as far as the progress monitoring reports, and yes, the service logs, and yes, talking to the service provider as far as what is being provided, how often, and even little things like maybe the services are being provided with fidelity, but maybe your child isn't attending to those services. Because the whole gotcha mentality is that okay, I'm going to get these blank service logs, and that's going to be my aha, see, you haven't been providing services, so now provide services, and since you haven't been providing services, provide even more services. And that's just not how it works. I brought this up with my friend Laura, who's a special ed attorney, and she's my age, middle-aged woman. She's been a special ed attorney for decades, and she even said a gotcha is like this wish for a smoking gun. And in all her years of being a family attorney, she's had one, right? One. If you live in a crappy district, you have a crappy IEP team, they're a crappy IEP team. And even when they're presented with mountains of evidence, I wouldn't expect them to see the light and all of a sudden become a good IEP team. You don't want to change the argument to this gotcha item instead of the child. If you have, gotcha information, that's fine. You can use it. It's data, it's documentation, but you want to ask yourself, what does this tell me about my child, and how has this affected my child? How has this affected my child's progress? Is my child's progress affected by this? Right? Is this just a single incident? Is it a series of incidents? Okay. Do you have proof of this gotcha moment? Because if you don't have it in writing and it's well, she said this and the para told me this and another kid in the class said this, if you don't have it in writing that it happened, it didn't happen. That's just how due process hearings and the IEP process works, is that it has to be documented. Rather than focusing on things like, is that legal? Can they do that? Is that legal or is that illegal? Ask yourself, how does this affect my child and their education? If you have information where the school has wronged your child and you have the data and documentation, there are options. You can file state complaints. You can file OCR complaints. You can look on your school district website to see what kind of grievance policies they have. There are things that you can do. I just wouldn't expect to walk into a school building, either a drop-off time or an IEP meeting with this big gotcha and expect an IEP team to just kind of roll over and give you whatever you want on your IEP. It just doesn't work like that. I've never seen it work like that in 16 years of advocacy. If you think you have this gotcha information on your IEP team and you think that you're going to use that information to leverage advantage over them, right? That surely they're going to be mortified that I caught them doing something wrong. And in an effort to make it better and smooth that over, they're going to give me everything I ask for, right? That just doesn't happen. I'm a stickler for a lot of things, and I preach a lot of things to parents. But one of my advocacy philosophies is to be as specific as possible in the IEP, because a lot of times parents think they have this gotcha and it's not even a gotcha. For example, they'll think that an accommodation is not being provided, and they'll ask their child if, did you go to the resource room for testing? Did you get extra time? Did you do this? Did you do that? And if they say no, right, the parent gets all up in arms, like, oh my gosh, this is an accommodation on their IEP and they're not getting it. But if you look at the wording on the IEP, it might not be clearly defined. It might say something like has access to, or when requested, or as needed. And if it's not clearly defined that the onus is on the teacher to verbally prompt the child to leave the room and go take the test in another room, because that's come up a lot, and they go, well, he did poorly on this test and he's supposed to go to the resource room and they didn't take him. And you ask the teacher and she says, well, he didn't ask to go. In which case they're both right? The teacher is following the IEP as written, if that's what it says, that the student will request it or that it'll be as needed. But if you want your child to leave the room for every single test, you need to get that documented in the IEP. IEPs not being followed is one of the biggest complaints. It's one of the biggest and most frequent concerns I hear from parents, is that they fought for an IEP and now it's not being followed. But if you dig in and look at the actual wording, there's a lot of really vague language, like will have access to, as needed. And so technically the school is following the IEP. You need to get that stuff further defined. All right, listen, to wrap up, Keep your disputes and keep your conversations with and about your child on your child. How is this affecting your child, their access to their education, their progress, right? Keep it focused on the child and not on the team. Ask yourself, how is this affecting my child? And then, yes, what can you do with that information? If it's worthy of a complaint, then file a complaint. I just wouldn't expect a mistake or an incident or something that has happened at the school to be this big, again, gotcha, right? I get it. I know how, what's the word I'm looking for? I know how marginalized you feel at an IEP meeting, right? You're sitting there against 10 other people. They all work together. They see each other every day. They're all being paid to be there. This is part of their work day. And the parent, on the other hand, has had to take time off work to go. And it's stressful. It is. And that's why I've dedicated my life to making this easier. But I want you all to advocate smarter. And that's why I have this podcast and my website and my training and my toolkits and my YouTube channel and my message boards and everything else. So please tune in. I will put all of the resources in the show notes or in the email. And I thank you for being here.
Thank you for listening to Don't IEP Alone with special education advocate Lisa Lightner. We're so glad you've joined us and would love to connect with you outside of the show. For more information about Lisa, the IEP Toolkit, and more ways we can help you in your process, go to adayinourshoes.com. From self-care tips to common IEP mistakes, there's even more to explore. Don't forget to rate and review the podcast and subscribe to never miss an episode. Until next time, don't IEP alone, and you don't have to.